Welcome to Draw This. Draw This is a series of videos where I'll randomly generate a word and then draw it for you in real time while describing my process so that you, the viewer, can follow along. We'll go ahead and get started and randomly generate a word using wordgenerator.net, and the word that I get is bird. Now I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on that a little bit and do a hummingbird specifically. So we'll go ahead and get started painting. I'm going to be painting with ArtRage 4 today. So I have that open, and I did a quick sketch of the hummingbird using the pencil tool and a dark gray color. And I did this sketch on a new layer that was called Sketch, and we'll go ahead and start adding some paint. So we'll create a new layer using the plus icon, and we'll drag that layer down below the sketch. We'll right click on it and then do set layer name, and we'll name it paint. And then we'll go ahead and select a kind of dark medium gray color so that we can go ahead and start filling this in. We'll use the oil brush to do most of our painting. Now we're not going to fill it in a bright color, we're just going to fill it in with these gray values just to establish the overall value structure of the bird, and once we're done with that, then we'll go ahead and add color as a glaze. I flipped my stylus pen over. You can also use the eraser to go ahead and erase anything that you've overpainted, which works really well to sculpt this shape. Now we'll go ahead and select a darker gray, and we can start adding some area for the tail right in the center, and then we can go ahead and darken the color a little bit more, and we can paint in the tail feathers because this will be much darker. And you can feel free to go ahead and do this pretty sloppy because we can clean it up later if we need to. We'll select a light gray and we'll go ahead and paint in the hummingbird's legs. And again, I'm just going to do these very rough. I'm not going to worry about making it look super detailed yet. It's almost always better to work from rough to detailed, I find. And the way I'm doing this painting, I'm trying to do it kind of like I would with an acrylic painting or an oil painting with real paint. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the wings with a dark gray color. I'm going to shift that color slightly lighter and then rough in some feathers for the rest of the wings. Again, you can be pretty sloppy about this because we can clean it up. We just want to get the basic overall form and light and dark structure of the piece. I'm going to use a dark to fill in the eye a little bit. It's okay if everything's not absolutely perfect at this point because we can refine it. I'm adding the dark area for the beak and just filling that in. And then I'm going to select a medium gray and add that to the bottom of the beak to go ahead and fill that in. Now I'm trying to use grays that are different from each other. These might not be the end result values, but I just want these areas to be separate so that I can see them visually. So I'm going to lighten the bottom of the beak there so it stands out from the base color, and then just start tightening things up. Now this particular brush kind of builds up. You have to lift your brush up occasionally to reload the paint onto your brush. So you could think of lifting the brush up like dipping it in paint. So I'm just going to add in lighter areas to start to really shape these feathers and wings and make it look a little more three-dimensional. I'll make my color darker and I'll do the same. And a lot of this painting is just going to be about adding light and dark until you get the result that you want. And you want to work from broad detail to fine detail. So start with bigger brushes, bigger shapes, and work your way on down to the smaller shapes using smaller brushes. I've gone ahead and hidden the sketch layer by clicking the eyeball icon because we don't really need the sketch anymore. Then I'm just going to go ahead and add a little more light gray to balance things out. At any time you can hold Alt on your keyboard to sample colors that are on screen, so that'll make it easy to pick colors really quickly. Now we can begin adding a lot of fine details using a very tiny brush. I'm going to start with the legs and just kind of outline those and shape them more appropriately. I'm going to add some light to draw on the claws. And then at this point you can really start working more detailed rather than broad. But you'll notice that I'm just kind of fleshing everything out, adding light when I need it, adding dark when I need it, and really just kind of jumping around everywhere. Once you've deposited a lot of paint, you can go ahead and start blending it using the palette knife. And this particular palette knife preset that I'm using is called Hard Out Smudge. I think it has a nice painterly effect. So I'm just going through and smudging everywhere and making it look nice and blended all over the piece. You want to zoom out occasionally by holding Shift and the space bar and dragging with your pen, and if you evaluate it small and it looks good, you know you're on the right track. I'm going to use the eraser to reshape all of the edges a little bit and clean them up a little bit more. You don't have to make the wings perfect because we're going to have them a little bit blurry and in motion. I'm going to create a new layer and move it all the way down to the bottom and call it background. and we'll put in our background on a separate layer. That way we can make changes to it if we need to, independent from the bird. We'll fill it with a light gray using the paint bucket, and we'll add some brush stroke texture using the oil brush to just paint over everything using crisscross strokes. Then we'll add lighter and darker patches here and there to make it look like a garden or something. Right now it's gray and it doesn't really look like anything, but when we add color over it, it'll make a little more sense. This will be an out of focus background. We will blend it a little bit using the hard out smudge just to make it all nice and blended. We'll create a new layer above the bird and we will call that glaze, and we can begin adding color. We'll start with a light green, which will be the base color. We'll change the blend mode to multiply. That way it will blend with the layers below it and glaze. Then we'll use the oil brush to go ahead and paint in some different hues of green over the bird's body. We can then switch to a light orange and we can begin filling in the feathers in some different places using that kind of peach light orange color. It ends up looking a little brown when it mixes with the gray underneath, so you'll have to kind of account for that when you're picking colors. Lighter colors usually work better than darker colors, otherwise you'll over darken. So I'm just filling in all the rest of the colors here and there, lighter and darker as I need to. I'm going to add a new layer above the glaze for some opaque paint. And this is kind of what you do if you were painting with acrylic or oil. You'd add a little bit of opaque to bring back your highlight areas or your lighter areas. So I'm going to add a highlight on the eye, and then just here and there and everywhere where I think it needs to be lighter or darker, I'm going to balance it out a little bit more and just make everything pop out. Give it a lot of nice contrast and color. And then after I've deposited paint, I'll go ahead and blend it. After I've blended it, I'll merge the layers down one by one so that we get one single layer for the bird. We go from the top down when we're merging. We'll return to the background layer and we'll add a new layer above that. We will name it background tint, and we will be glazing the same way that we did with the bird, only with the background. So we'll want that to be a blend mode of multiply. And we'll go ahead and use the airbrush to just fill it in with a nice base green color, kind of similar to your bird. And then again, you'll want to vary your hue a little bit. So use some different greens. You could even use yellows and browns and purples, whatever you think will look good for your background. But for this piece, I wanted to have an overall green theme to it, so it looks like a garden or something in the background that's out of focus. I have merged my tint with my background layer to make one layer for the background. And then I'm going to use the palette knife with the preset called Frost to just blend out any harsh details and make it look nice and soft. Then I'm going to use the hard out smear again on the bird layer to just blend it anywhere that I see that it's a little bit too sharp. Sometimes when you deposit paint, you get these little dots and they don't look very natural because they're too even. So I like to just blend over those little dots of paint and smudge them in. Just helps the piece look a little more painterly. We'll go ahead and merge our layers down again so that our bird is now on the same layer as our background. We don't need the bird to be separate anymore. And we can just use Alt on our keyboard to sample colors from the background and fix the wing, sample colors from the wing and extend it. Just anywhere you need to sample colors and paint and erase and add and subtract all over to kind of tighten things up. I'm going to go ahead and add some little feather details here and there. And you can really make it pop by adding a little bit of dark and a little bit of bright color here and there. I'm going to add another new layer and I'm going to make that blend mode screen. And I'm going to use the airbrush to just brighten it in a few places to make it look a little more three-dimensional because it's too dark overall. If you find that you over-screen it a little too much, just go ahead and use your eraser to erase any areas where it's just too bright, like on the eye here for instance. I don't want it to be so bright. And then you can also play with the opacity of that layer to kind of subdue the effect a little bit. The opacity is this little wheel here that you drag kind of like a clock to reduce the opacity. We'll use the selection tool and go ahead and merge the layers first. And I think this eye is too big, so I'm going to make a selection around the eye, and then I'm going to cut it and I'm going to paste it. And I'm just going to drag it and move it over where I think it needs to be, and I can even make it smaller if I need to, just by dragging these corner points. You can hold Shift to constrain the proportions. I'm going to get the eye where I want it to be, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply that change. Then we'll just merge that eye layer with the background again so that they're the same layer, because we're going to want to blend away that square edge there. So we'll just use the hard out smudge for that and just blend right around that edge to just fix it and make it look like it was never messed up to begin with. And that's the fun thing about digital paint. Let's save this as a PSD and let's add some motion over in Photoshop using the new path blur tool. So we'll go to blur gallery, path blur, and right now we just have a basic path which is blurring everything. We don't want that, but for now we can just click on each endpoint and move the path over towards the wing. So we'll have the wing kind of flapping down and to the right. We'll click and create another path, and what you want to do to remove the blur is you have to click on each endpoint and you have to reduce the endpoint speed for both points. Once you do that, that region is no longer going to be blurred, and that's kind of your way of unblurring areas. So we want the center of the bird not to be blurry, so we're going to line that non-blurred path up there. And we want the beak to be not blurred either, so we'll go ahead and reduce the endpoint speed on a path that goes towards its beak. And then I'll go ahead and just continue adding paths to make the bird look the way I want. Now it looks like the wings are moving very fast and the bird's in flight. Let's play with the color balance a little bit. We'll create an effect for color balance, and we'll just play with that a little bit here in Photoshop and balance out the color and make it pop a little bit more. We'll use another color balance layer and we'll add a little bit of cool green. And then what we can do is we can add a mask in some different places using the radial gradient to just make the light look like it's kind of coming from the top left. And so it's kind of warmer on one side and cooler on the other. I think that helps everything look cool to do that. We'll reduce the opacity of those effect layers until we get a nice subtle blend. We don't want it to be overdone. We'll add another effect for levels, and we'll try auto and see how that looks. That helps balance out the contrast most of the time. And you can play with the sliders to get the brightness and contrast looking the way you want. We'll create an effect called solid color, and we'll select a dark blue-green, and we will change the blend mode to lighten. What this is doing is this is making all the dark areas into whichever color we choose. So I'm going to take everything and make it less black and more blue-green, which gives it kind of a cool effect. And now we can zoom out to evaluate our piece, and I think we have a finished hummingbird. If you enjoyed this episode of Draw This, I hope you'll join me every Tuesday for a new episode. Don't forget to click the like button and share this with your friends, and click the subscribe button to be able to see all of my videos as they're released. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.